Welcome to Filmstrip, movie reviews presented by Continuous Play Podcast. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Filmstrip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Nick.
And this is our review of It, starring Jaden Lieberher, Finn Wolfhard, Sophia Lillis, Jeremy Ray Taylor, Wyatt Oliff, Jack Dylan Grazer, Chosen Jacobs, Nicholas Hamilton, and Bill Skarsgård. Directed by Andy Muschietti, released in September 2017 on a $35 million budget, grossed $698 million worldwide. Was a massive, massive hit, as we know, Nick, from the the box office returns and all the reviews and stuff. It was long anticipated, too. I mean, back in 2013, was it, when we were doing some of our selected works of Stephen King, we did the It miniseries, and they were talking about the remake or reboot then.
It was even talked about even before 2013, as far as one of the potential Stephen King adaptations they wanted to go back and revisit. We always get I think for a while we're getting like a bi-yearly like Stephen King adaptation, but what had happened was after the first season of True Detective, the director of the first season, who directed every episode, Cary, is like Fukunaga or something like that. I probably said that wrong.
You butchered his name about like I did that kids at the beginning of this, but yeah.
It's a hard last name to say with my Midwestern tongue, but he was attached for quite a bit, and he had wrote a screenplay. And apparently what happened there was, of course, the whole creative differences thing. I think there might have been some budget issues and something like that. But he ended up walking. But then what happened was they had brought on this director, and then he had taken Cary's script and basically just kind of rejiggered it, whatever you want to call it. And a lot of it's still there. I actually was able to read the original script about a year ago. It got leaked online, and I read it, and it's got a lot of the same beats. Some of it's a little bit more violent, but then a lot of it's a little bit more dramatic and a little bit more dry. But you can still see the soul of that movie within the new one that just came out.
Well, that's interesting because I didn't look at any of the old scripts or anything like that, but that's neat that you looked into that. I think you can't deny the fact that one of the reasons this turned out the way it did was the phenomenon that was Stranger Things in 2016, and to some extent the phenomenon that was The Force Awakens in 2015. Like that 1980s nostalgia trip that we're still on in popular culture. And I guess it's time. I mean, it's in the cycle, right? But that has such a huge influence. And it's not just because Finn Wolfhard, who's in this movie and is also in Stranger Things, is the shared cast member, but it's the whole tone of everything in this is so much more bent toward that kind of aesthetic, if you will. At least it was to me.
Well, I think, we go through a cycle every 10 years where we look fondly back at the next decade. So, I mean, we had the 70s for a while before, and then the 60s and everything like that, as far as like these somewhat period pieces, but more of just a setting for, popular, genre films out there. So 80s is pretty prime right now. And, I don't know. I think it's also kind of catching on too, because you look at especially like with kids, like Stranger Things is really big with my son. He's been sick actually for the last week, and he's probably watched both seasons like 3 times in a row over the last week. He's obsessed with it. But it's that nerd culture in the 80s that they really kind of play up, and especially like the video game culture, like in Stranger Things, which of course kids today are all into kind of the same thing. It's kind of like, bell bottoms coming back or whatever you want to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, and there's nothing wrong with nostalgia and looking back. I'm not dinging it for that. I just think that all the different iterations, and you can go online and read about all the post-production and how long it took them forever to get this. Muschietti got involved in 2015, and obviously that was something he was going to draw from, and it was something that he cared a lot about. I mean, you're talking about a guy who had, he had worked, I mean, the thing he's most known for is probably I guess you'd call it a horror film called Mama from 2013. Have you ever seen that thing?
Nope.
It's kind of in the vein of like The Conjuring and some of that haunted house stuff, but not with like investigators and things, but like Babadook and all that. My wife loves it. She watched it, bought it, was obsessed with it, and I kind of felt like that was a throwback in and of itself. And then he got involved with this, and now he's doing this. He's going to do the second part of it, which they've already announced for 2019. And then he's going to do something that I'm really interesting. It's not official yet, but he's tied into a reboot of Robotech, which, I mean, I guess they're going to get around to redoing everything now, so might as well get into that.
He's also talking about doing Pet Sematary as well.
That I could see as ripe for a redo. I mean, I think some of this Stephen King stuff, I'm not so precious with it that I don't think it can't be redone. And I don't want to say that. What I want to call out immediately is that there's obviously a lot of influence here. And I'm going to posit an idea to you that I think this movie could have just worked by itself if it didn't have to carry the weight and the baggage of the Stephen King story. We'll get into that maybe later on, but my first time watching this, and I didn't see it in theaters. It was a busy time of the year when this came out. I just had too much going on, and I said, and I talked to a friend who saw it, and I said, don't spoil it for me, but tell me, is this something I need to see in a theater? And he said, no, not really. If you got a decent TV at home, not that big a deal. And I said, fine. So I bought it when it came out it just came out around the holidays on, digital download, and so I bought it and watched it over the holidays. And I had a pretty negative reaction to it the first time. I think I messaged you about it. That's when we decided, we need to do this one. Now, I went back and watched it again and had a little different reaction to it. But there's, I kind of feel the same way. I wonder if this wouldn't have just been fine without the weight of the Stephen King story that it's trying to carry. So
I don't think it would have done as well, because there's one thing that we're missing on this was, of course, this is kind of the second adaptation for this, because they had the miniseries back in the early 90s, and as much as that movie's aged pretty badly over the last 20 years or whatever,
27 years,
27 years, it's it was a cultural phenomenon back then, basically because of the performance of Tim Curry. I mean, you go anywhere and you show that picture of that clown to anybody and they go, oh, that's Pennywise the clown. I mean, I think out of all of Stephen King's work, he's the most, he's the poster child of it all.
Well, yeah, so it is that performance. It's also the performance of some of those other actors, and particularly those kid actors. And if you go back and listen to our episodes on that, you and I talked about it. We talked about how the kids in that one were so good, and they did such a good job of like analoging them to their adult side. Like the only one that's the big transformation is the kid that's Ben Hanscom, and then he becomes John Ritter, which neither one of them look at all like that character's supposed to. But you go with it because Ritter's good and that kid was good, and they all had their moments, and there's a real sweetness to that because it's on television, it is tame per se, but it still more or less works as a story. This one, they make the bold choice, and we'll get into it in a minute after the plot summary, that it's going to be all about the kids. We're never going to see the adults here. And I think they had made that choice early on in the process. They knew they wanted to break this into two again, and they really just wanted to tell the kid story. And I got to think that, again, that Stranger Things phenomenon and some of that sold them on the idea that, you can just do a kid's story or just have the kid's story carry this whole movie.
I think it has more to do. I don't know if you've read the book, but it's a long book. I mean,
I've read the book many times. Yes,
it's well over 1,000 pages, and the book is split up kind of like the original miniseries, where you're flipping back and forth, and you're getting both climaxes during the climax, as far as the kids fighting the clown and the adults fighting the clown, and you're going back and forth between it, so you're kind of getting almost like a Godfather 2 type telling of it. But I think what the problem is you're not able to put a 1,000-page book into basically an hour and 50-minute 2-hour movie. And really, I mean, I think when they first started developing in this, and this was before Stranger Things came out, I think that they weren't sure they were going to have a hit here. So we'll make half a movie, but there's really no way to do the adult and kid story and split it in half. There's really no good, it's not like Lord of the Rings where you guys, there's areas where you kind of have a climax and you can kind of break it up. There's really nothing like that in the book. So I think they made, the best decision possible for it, and just going, okay, we have a kid side and we have an adult side. There we go. We have two different stories. We can tell the kids thing. If it doesn't work out, we still told a kind of a complete story here.
Well, and that's I'll agree with what you're saying, that the way, if you're trying to follow the book, it may seem hard. How in the world are we going to get all that in to one thing? But if you want to, you can fan edit the book and just read the kids' parts and then go read the adult parts. Like you could do that with it. I mean, it would make for a really weird and long read, but you could do that with it if you wanted to. I think it's smart to try and pare this down a little bit. And I love that book. I think it's probably Stephen King's most interesting work, and I mean that's saying something because he's done so much stuff. It's the one that I will go back to more often than not to revisit as a book or an audio book. But I won't sit here and tell you that I don't think it's a little bloated. I mean, he gives 7 examples sometimes when 3 would have done. And the miniseries kind of got that right, is that we didn't get to see every kid's encounter with it. We just got to see like the important ones, and then we got like moments of the other ones. And so there's a way to cut this down. And he himself, King said he was really happy with what they did with it. And I guess that's fine and good. Honestly, I don't care if he likes it or not, because I'm not going to it just because it's him. I'm interested to see how you make this story work with a little bit more of a modern sensibility, because the thing they do also is that book is set between the 1950s and the 1980s and 1990, right around there, that turn of the decade. And this is going to be set in the mid to late 80s and is going to come out, now it's going to be 2018, 2019, so they're going to go that far ahead. So they've made a distinct choice in updating this. So it's really for people like my age and your age, Nick, that were or maybe a little bit older than us, but like more my brother's age, who were just beginning to be teenagers in the late 80s and then would become adults 27 years later. What would that look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get into it, man, and do a quick plot summary. I mean, I can't imagine anybody listening to this either hasn't seen it or doesn't know the basic story of it, but we'll tell you real fast what happens in this one, and then we can get into the details later. There's 7 outcasts bond together over being outcasts and shared horrific experiences in their hometown of Derry, Maine. They're pitted against their worst nightmares conjured by an ancient shape-shifting evil that emerges to prey upon the town, especially children, every 27 years. And the group bands together to take on this being who most manifests itself as a clown known as Pennywise. They confront and seemingly beat back Pennywise several times before finally facing off in his own lair below the town in the sewers. And when they emerge from the battle, they make a blood oath to return again should it ever reappear. That's the quick through line. There's obviously a lot more that goes on, but I'm the first thing that hit me about this was how truncated they make the story. I mean, this is a 2-hour and 15-minute movie, and it doesn't drag. It's pretty fleet in the way that it moves, but they really changed the focus of some of the kids here. And I wanted to just kind of get your impression on Bill, Richie, Bev, Ben, Eddie, Stan, and Mike this time, and the updates they made to them.
I like the kids a lot. I mean, I think this is a lot like kind of how I felt about Stranger Things. Is I think the strongest point of this movie is the relationship that all the kids have with each other. I mean, they're back and forth and, quick pro quos with each other and everything like that, or, very correct, I think, for that age group, just the way they talk to each other. And I just kind of like the little misadventures that they go on throughout the movie. So, I mean, as far as they all go, I think every single actor in here, as far as, the children go, are extremely strong.
I have a different take on it. I think Bill's good. That's Jaden, and I can't say his last name, so I won't butcher it again. I think he's pretty good. I think the young lady who plays Bev is really good. And the thing they've done here is that the kids in the book are like 9 and 10 in the original story. These kids are like 12 and 13. So they've aged them up a little bit so that they can do some more, shall I say, adult things with them. I mean, they can play some more stuff with them. The other thing, too, is that, I mean, and in Stephen King's books, everybody always curses like sailors because he says that's just how people talk. I think there's a joke in the movie Misery about that, too, that's supposed to be kind of his brush off to anybody that says anything like that. My brother was this age at this time. I'm telling you, I was around him all the time. Nobody talks like this. Okay, these kids are foul. And sometimes that nobody talked like this. But making it a little older makes that different. The thing that I think happens, I mean, they changed the Eddie character almost completely, right? Because he was from a well-to-do kind of, single parent family, but his mother was like a real health freak and he was a hypochondriac because of it. But now he's like white trash, and I didn't care for the way that played off, because he comes off like this kid, Jack Dylan Grazer, by the way, is a spit like image of Fred Savage from the Wonder Years. I don't know if that's on purpose or not, but God, he looked like him. Did you get that too?
No, I never really got that, but I can kind of see where you're getting that from.
Yeah, I mean, look at him again. He is that. The one that I think gets the shortest shrift of them all is Mike. I mean, he had such an integral role in that, in the original story. I mean, he was really kind of the one that was telling us this story. You come to find out it's mostly from his recollections and his writings and his point of view. Here, he's an African-American homeschool student. He has no, real connection to anybody here. I mean, he is as outside as you can get. I wanted to ask you, I don't remember homeschooling being a thing in the 80s. Was it? And maybe I just didn't know about it? Because I had never heard of that until, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago?
I don't really think he was being homeschooled the way that, some helicopter parents homeschool nowadays. I think really what they were trying to show is he wasn't welcome in that town. I mean, there was a thick sense of racism, that was going against him and his family in that town.
Yeah.
And I think that, it was kind of you're going to be a farmhand just like your dad and just like your grandfather and just like your great grandfather, and this is what you're going to be. You're not going to go to school, and you'll learn everything you need to learn here. So I think really that's what it was. He was getting more of a farm education than as opposed to mom sitting down with them going over algebra books or something like that.
And that's fine. That seems out of place, though, for the time. Because, again, I'm just thinking about the 1980s and the way we looked at education and things like that. The truancy officers would have been all over these people, outcasts or no. I don't think they would have allowed that kind of thing to just, exist in their town, racism or not. I had a real problem with that. But moreover, they don't give that kid anything to do in this movie, though, Nick. He is barely in it, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to be so PC about it that they cut the black kid out. That's not it. It's the character was an interesting guy, and now he's so periphery to everything that they're doing that it's almost like he doesn't even need to be in the movie.
I think what they were having trouble with here is, even though there's some heavy themes that they really could have brought in here, I think that they were kind of picking and choosing which ones they wanted to go with, because we'll get into Bev, because there's an entire pedophilia plot with her.
Yeah, and I think that was that in. It's been a couple of years, so her dad was just like an abusive jerk. I don't remember the sexual abuse part of it.
It's kind of, I want to say it's slightly hinted at in the book. I haven't read it in a while, so I could be mistaken, but he was abusive. But I think that's kind of, if you got the racist and then you got the pedophilia thing all going on in the movie, you know what I mean? It's
a little much.
It might be a little too much.
Yeah, you've got the white trash thing. I mean, they play down they changed a little something about Stan Uris. He's now the son of a rabbi, so they play with that a little bit more, which is different. Which he was Jewish in the first movie, but his friends sort of play, especially Richie, just plays off like he's a Jew, and it was no big deal. But that was the 50s. So it was a different time. In the 80s, I don't know how they would do it. I mean, this movie is really interested in three people, though. All right, and I want to say that. I think it's interested in Bev, it's interested in Bill, and it's interested in Richie, and a little bit of Eddie. But Stan and Ben, and which is sad for Ben, because Ben Hanscom's a neat character, and Mike, they're just kind of on the periphery the whole time. That's the one thing that the book does a great job of course, because it's a book and it can be really long, is everybody gets their moment and stuff. But that original miniseries even did a good job of balancing enough moments with the kids that you really got it. And as good as this Bill is, though, the stutterer of this, I mean, he has some of the same arc. His brother, instead of getting killed, he goes missing, but he seems to have sort of figured out that he's probably in the sewer somehow because he read something from his dad's office. That they do so much quick hand stuff, and then they spend a lot of time with these kids ripping on each other. And I'm like, well, you could have spent more time trying to develop how he's figuring any of this stuff out. I felt like this movie really wanted to be about Bill and Bev and Richie, and then all these other kids were just kind of there in the way.
Well, I think when you're doing something like this, you got to have your characters in focus. It's a lot of kids here, and to really give each one of them their moment to shine, there's not enough time in a 2-hour movie.
Okay,
like
wait
you said,
a minute.
there's plenty of time though in a book.
You say that though, but that miniseries, which is about 90 minutes for that first episode, it does it. Every kid gets their moment. You know their story. You know their plight. I mean, I think you even know more about Henry Bowers. I mean, the way they play him this time is, we'll get to him in a minute, but budding psychopath. But with a bad mullet. But the you say there's too many kids to like get their moment, but they did it in a TV movie in 1990. This is a $35 million big budget movie, and they got 2 hours and 15 minutes, and they can't get everybody a moment.
Well, everybody, I mean, all of them do get their moment with the clown, but I think really what they wanted to do was kind of, like you said, shift focus more to a couple more central characters, as opposed to giving them all 20% of the movie. It's going to be kind of, 35, 30, 20, and then the rest being kind of what's left over with it. Because I think that, that's kind of what they're trying to do here, is be it more focused on Bill and Bev as kind of being the two main characters here.
Yeah, it definitely is more on them than anybody else. I mean, they get the most screen time, I would think, and the most a bit. Now, Richie gets all the one-liners and stuff because Finn Wolfhard's, funny. I mean, he was the funny one on Stranger Things, so you let that kid be the foul-mouthed funny one in this one. So I get why you let him do that stuff, so that works. But it's really about Bill and Bev a lot. And I mean, they take the whole like historian who figures out all of what's going on in Derry. That was Mike in the book. That was Mike in the miniseries. Now that's Ben for some reason, and they completely changed his whole backstory. I mean, he had such a great backstory. His father had been killed in the war. His mother had to move back in with her sister and her family to try to get back on their feet, like they were struggling. And maybe that was just because that was a 50s thing and you couldn't do that in the 80s. But why couldn't his dad get killed in Vietnam, or Grenada or something like that? I mean, people don't think that's a big deal, but it does. I mean, I kind of felt like what they changed about him and what they changed about Mike really shorted the characters from me caring about them. And I think you're onto something, that they didn't really want me to care about them. They want me to care about Bill and really Bev. And then they want me to laugh at Richie.
Yeah, for the most part. But I like Ben. I actually, like in this one, I felt sorry for him. You know what I mean? I actually felt sympathy for the character. Here in the miniseries, I never really felt much for him. He, I feel bad because the guy's dad died and he's got kind of a shit of a cousin and stuff like that. But, for the most part, it's like, he's really not that fat. You know what I mean? He's probably going to be a pretty good football player. I mean, that was what's going through my mind.
The kid in the miniseries, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, the kid in the miniseries. But this Ben, like,
yeah, he's a chubby little kid. So,
yeah,
I mean, that's
to put it lightly. I mean, it's a great. I think he does well because, like, especially like his first interaction with Bev, it's like, man, I really, really feel sorry for the kid. It's like, I want to go out there and like, hey, man, wasn't weird that a 34-year-old, but it's like, dude, let's go. I'll be your friend. I don't know. It's it's kind of how you felt, but I like kind of the other little character beats that they gave him, where it's, he's into New Kids on the Block and stuff like that. I thought that was kind of a cute little way to kind of, separate the kids and give them something kind of unique about them besides him just being fat.
Right. I mean, they played him off as the kid that like would get picked on for his eccentric tastes and stuff like that, and he would just have to kind of absorb the bullying from it more than just being. I mean, he's the new kid too, but he's also. I mean, he is kind of different. I mean, that's not what you would expect a boy that age and that time. He'd be listening to, Judas Priest or Def Leppard or something. He would be listening to New Kids on the Block. The thing that I will say that I like about the Bev character, and it's really Sophia Lillis plays this so well, is I had friends that were girls this age when I was growing up, and there's like a time in life when the girls are all taller than the boys. And they're also more advanced, and they're more grown up and stuff like that. And I like the fact that she's pretty much taller than every boy here except Bill. And I remember, like, when I got my growth spurt, because I'm kind of tall, and I got tall, and I caught up with all the girls finally, and thinking that was a big deal, because all the girls I thought were so pretty were the tall girls. But the other thing they play her off as is, I mean, in the book and in the other miniseries, she was poor. Her dad was the janitor, and that's why everybody looked down on her. They made fun of her. Here, I mean, you kind of get the sense that they're not exactly well off either. But like, she has this terrible reputation at school for being a promiscuous, and it's all just made up by the mean girls that she goes to school with.
And it's perfect. I mean, but I'm sure you remember that in high school as well. I mean, I remember that where it was, I even had this conversation actually a couple of days ago. We were talking about bullying with my family, and I'm like, the girls are so much worse than the guys. I'm like, the guys, most of the time, yeah, they get into a fight, they push each other, maybe a couple punches are thrown, it's broken up, and they're cool the next day. Girls, like in high school and middle school, it's like, oh man, they try to destroy each other sometimes. Oh. And you can see that here with the pouring the garbage on her and calling her Beaverly and stuff. And I think that's very appropriate for, especially in the 90s when I was like going through that, where it was like, yeah, I saw girls go to other girls' house and write slut on the driveway with spray paint and everything. So
good grief. No, you know what though? I mean, the worst fights were always the girl fights at this age. 13, 12, whatever. I mean, it was
hair in the nails.
And not only the physical fights, but just the petty, passive aggressive stuff they would do to each other. They do capture that really well, that these girls are awful to this girl. But the way she plays it off, and again, I'm projecting a little bit here, but I had a friend who, no fault of her own, and I knew her well enough to know it wasn't true. People just started talking about her like this, and she was like, I don't give an F what anybody says about me. And so she just let it roll off her back like water off a duck. And you know what? She was better for it because she was way more mature than anybody else that I went to high school with. And when she, grew up and got out of Dodge, she was like, I'm gone and I'm staying gone. And she is really successful and has a great family now, and more power to her and stuff like that. And I doubt she's listening to the show, so I don't know why I'm being so, masked about it. But really, like, I was watching this. I'm like, I've seen this, so I can relate to this character, and it makes me like Beverly more. But I want to say, I feel like the sexual abuse from the father was just like a bridge too far. And I know I shouldn't care because it's supposed to really endear me to the character more, but I was like, I don't know that we needed that. Is what I'm saying. Like, I think we could have gotten everything we wanted to know about her and been on her side without having to see her clock her dad with a friggin', top of a toilet bowl, basically, when he's chasing after her like some horny asshole.
See, what I think they were doing here is, I mean, showing her in school and everything like that, and especially how she deals with the boys, is they're showing her to kind of be the brawn of the group. You know what I mean? Where she's a tough one.
Well, wasn't she in the book too? Like, she was the best shot. She was the tough one. Like that's always played out, and they don't really play that out here, though, because she is the brawn of the group. But let's just say it now. In the end, she gets suspended in animation, and two guys have to kiss her to wake her up. I mean, I was like, that's so like undercuts your whole character arc here.
See, I don't mind it though that, like I take it as all the stuff that happened in the town is because of Pennywise influence, like her dad and the way the dad, kind of is treating her. It's the town is poisoned. You know what I mean? It's why people are looking away when Ben's getting his stomach cut. It's like that's why when they're putting up missing kids posters, they're just putting them over the last one. It's like they're almost kind of forgetting. But what I think is I heard a critique too. It's like, oh, she's a damsel in distress in the end. And I'm like, well, that's not really how I took it. I took it as Pennywise, as this whole thing went on, he knew that he couldn't beat them as a group. And he realized that Bev was essentially the main person in this group. She was the one that was holding them together. She was the strongest one in the group. So it's like, who do you take out? You take out the strongest one, and you hope the rest crumble behind there. So that's what I took it as, like, especially when he came and he got her right after she clocked her dad with the toilet seat. It wasn't like, oh, damsel in distress, come get Mary Jane, Spider-Man. It's more or less, I got your backbone here, and now you guys are finished.
That's a very interesting way to explain it. I had not thought about it like that, because I felt like they set her up to be so strong and so great, and then they just completely cut that down with the way that they set her to the side and suspend her from nothing. But You're
But
you're not wrong. That's a good way to look at it. And I'll be honest with you, the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, I hate the way they do that. Watching it a second time, I let it go and kind of forgave it a little bit more or less. And I think it's because I didn't put a fine point on it, but the way you've explained it makes total sense. Like that, yes, that's was Pennywise's plan all along, was to take the heart of the group away.
Oh, totally. And it didn't work. I mean, I think his whole plan was he thought they're all going to break up. There's no way they're going to come down here and get her. And even his plan, though, was backfiring right when he got her, because he was trying to basically scare her. And when she's doing it, she's just like, I'm not scared of you. Mm-hmm. And it was just like,
but I want to tell you, one of the things that they get right in this movie is the effects and all the shape shifting and the stuff that, like, when Pennywise opens up that huge jaw and all those rows of teeth and the deadlights and all that stuff. I liked that. I thought that was awesome. Like, that you could tell that's where the money went in this movie, was on that, and it was well spent.
Oh yeah, that, and I think the town itself. I mean, it felt like the 80s. I mean, as far as everything goes, I mean, just the sets and everything there, and it felt good. I mean, as far as the 80s appeal came to it for. But the one thing I did like too, and this is such a thing I hate with Stephen King books, besides the fact that he can never stick an ending, is Henry Bowers here. He's not a freaking greaser. I don't know. There's got to be a story about Stephen King when he was a kid that he must have got picked on by greasers, because
they're in so many of his books. Yes,
it's almost sometimes they come back. I mean, there's so many of them where it's like this mean greaser guy with the little curl hair in the front and stuff. And I thought it was they could have done that again with him, or did something like make him like a biker kid or like an auto guy, you know what I mean?
Where he's working like on cars or something like that.
Yeah, actually, they could have done that.
What is the neat twist about Henry this time is he's the cop's son. And we know that his dad is kind of hard on his boy, but he's mostly hard on him because his boy walks around like he's hot stuff, and he's like, you're such a little wimp, and he's fake. I mean, he's a mullet, fake guy. Until Pennywise gets his claws into him. And I mean, what we see Henry do in this movie, I mean, he does some pretty nasty stuff to the kids, sure. And I mean, we see him actually cut Ben up a little bit, and that's disturbing. But he ultimately takes his like flick knife or whatever and cuts his dad's throat with it. And in a cut scene, he kills his other two friends before he goes to chase the kids in the sewers and stuff. I mean, he like becomes Michael Myers all of a sudden.
Yeah, and like I said, though, I'm glad that they changed him from a greaser. And the book stuff too with Henry Bowers. There's some Stephen King was on some strong LSD when he wrote that book, because there's shit in that book. You could never even do that today. I mean, just put it out there. I mean, Henry Bowers in there would actually make like his friends like actually perform fellatio on him in the book.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's grotesque.
It's just
again, it's some of that stuff where Stephen King could do something, but then he goes like 3 steps too far. That's kind of part of his problem, is he just tends to do that a lot.
It's like, if you want to make him gay and he's, in the closet and that's why he's mad or angry, go for it. But no, it's like, we're going to make it that he's raping the guy because he's just a mentally crazy guy. So he's going to hold a knife to his friend's, throat and basically do this or I'll kill you.
I don't think it's a sexuality thing at all with him. And
no, it's not. That's what I'm saying.
It's a power thing. But the thing that I will give this movie credit for is that they do cut the bully down to size, and they have someone that's an authority figure do it. All right. I mean, they have his dad de-ball him in front of his friends. He's out there shooting his dad's gun, acting like a badass. And his dad walks out there going, "What are you doing?" And he grabs that pistol and shoots at his feet like 4 times. And he just starts crying and crumbling. And he tells those other guys, "That's your real leader right there, boys." And this is not long before he kills him. But I was like, the dad's not wrong to cut that boy down to size a little bit, because somebody needs to.
It does. They need to, but the whole thing, though, it's...
I mean, they have the rock fight in the ditch again, which I don't know. I didn't think it was as good this time, but I mean, they get the crap beat out of them again by the guys and the girls. I mean, they do. I mean, it was a violent rock fight. It was more like a stoning from the Old Testament. This time there were some large rocks being hurled at one another there.
Yeah, the the fat guy got it pretty good in the face.
Yes.
Henry Bauer's fat friend got it
Yeah,
right in the
the
face.
one with the one with the Trans Am or the Skank Camaro, whichever one it was that he was driving. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got the Peyton Manning nose.
There we go. That's what it was from. I was wondering what that was. But yeah, those things I kind of like. But again, that gang they're really sort of periphery to all this because it's almost like you didn't need them because we spend so much time terrorizing these kids with Pennywise that I don't know that we needed the bully gang other than we just want to do that beat again because it's part of what you do in this movie. And let's get to him. We haven't even talked about him. Pennywise this time. Bill Skarsgård. What a weird dude. I mean, what a weird makeup and everything they've done with him here, man. Like, I got to say, I was like, this is like some demented Bugs Bunny thing he's got going on. What was all that?
Well, if in the book, I mean, Pennywise, I mean, everybody always looks at the miniseries with Tim Curry. Pennywise in the book was never that looking of a clown. They always made mention that he was kind of a clown from, decades and decades and decades ago, as far as his like motif goes. And that's the kind of clown that we have here, where this is a clown from the early 1900s. It's not from Bozo the Clown on, CBS or whatever channel he was on that they took it for Tim Curry. And that's the whole thing is I think they're trying to show that he was kind of more ancient here, as you know what I mean, as far as his dress and his style goes.
He was definitely older. Like I got the idea that he was from a different time, like you say, and they do a better job of playing that. I'm talking about specifically Skarsgård's performance, though, like his voice and all the stuff he does with it. I mean, he does some of the same lines. I mean, some of the same exact dialogue again, and I'm fine with that because he delivers it, well enough. It's just there's something just, I don't know, strange about his portrayal he's kind of Chucky.
He's got a child.
Bit,
It's almost like a child. That was kind of a cool direction that they went here with, is as opposed to making it a 48-year-old man in clown makeup, it's why not have the clown be kind of closer looking to the actual kids? You know what I mean? Where it's as opposed to
he's a lot younger. Skarsgård's a lot
that's
younger
what
than Tim Curry was. So
totally, and I think that's kind of what they're going for here. Is like he's ancient, he's immortal, he's forever. So why would he be looking like a 55-year-old man? I think it's like a little bit more smarter for them. It's like, hey, I'm going to trap kids. Why not look more like a kid?
What do you think about like the manifestations that he does for the kids' fears and things like that? I mean, I thought it was really neat, some of the tricks he plays on them. I mean, the homeless guy that's, basically a leper coming after Eddie, and that's a good one. And then, the big scary thing that eats George's arm at the beginning is really freaky, and just some of the other manifestations. Well, the way he uses the balloons and all that stuff, I really thought the money that was spent in this movie on the effects was worth it because it was pretty darn impressive what he came up with.
Oh, I love how they did the balloons in here, as opposed to just, really using real balloons. Is like they had these balloons that basically defied gravity or defied wind patterns. And that was actually one of the things I remember most about the book was when Ben Haskam ran into Pennywise. He ran into him during a storm. And he always, one of the things that always, like I said, I remember was the balloon itself wasn't being blown with the wind. It was actually going against the wind. It had its own force here. And that's what they're doing with these balloons here, is like the balloons are, being controlled by him. They're not real balloons here. It's all just an element of him. And I liked all that stuff like that. I liked that, in the I thought one of the really great scenes was when Ben's in the library. I mean, just the mood and that librarian in there. And then he's going through the book and also he's paging forward and there's a head in the branch and everything. I thought that was all like really, really well done. I kind of wish there was a little bit more of that in this film.
Yeah.
As opposed to the jump scares kind of just being more eerie and quiet, and as opposed to looking in the foreground, you're looking in the background trying to figure out what's going on. Because if you go back and watch that library scene, there's some kind of weird stuff going on in the background.
Yeah, like we never explored before the explosion at the old plant. that they talk about in the book and that kind of gets, thrown out there in the movie and stuff too, that they never really, go into a lot of detail about it. But we see that one of the, the carnage of that is that somebody's head got separated from their body. Well, then that thing manifests and the headless thing starts coming after him in the library basement, which I thought was really well done and was incredibly freaky and just unnerving as hell.
And I know one of the criticisms too I heard on the movie is like Pennywise is always just running, then he misses the guys. And I'm like, but I think he's wanting to do that. He's not really at this point wanting to get these kids. I mean, it's like bleeding a cow for meat or something like that, where he said too, he goes, the fear, fear just makes him taste better. He's trying to get these kids to be scared to death as opposed to just picking them off.
Well, what he does and what we see at the end with like all those kids like hanging in suspended animation, and it's more on that theme of like, it's a big spider, is that the reason he only comes out every 27 years is because he stores up his meat. Like he does a little bit at a time, and then he kind of keeps it, and he just sort of eats on them slowly but surely, and that way it sort of sustains him long term. And he wants to get them to the moment when they're the most freaked out. And then he deadlights them, which I guess essentially just sort of suspends them, and then he can put them away and go to them when he wants to. And I'm with you. That's his whole MO here, and that's always been Pennywise's MO. And I think they do a decent enough job with him explaining it to the kids, like, oh, you can go away now because all we need is just good fear from this boy, and that's all I need. And it's really unnerving, mostly because Skarsgård is such a freaky actor in this and gives such a weird performance. I mean, Tim Curry gave like that off-putting, I do not want to meet that guy in a dark alley because he's a really kind of pervy and weird performance, versus this for like, I have no idea what's about to come out of this guy's mouth next. And oh my gosh, look at that mouth.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing too, is he had those big prosthetic teeth, and that's always one of the interesting things that they did in here was he was drooling a lot when he talked, and they left it in there. They could have like easily gave him cotton swabs in between takes or whatever, but they let him just like, you can see that, especially when he's talking to Georgie in the beginning, like just the drool and everything. And I like that too, where, that beginning scene with Georgie, like he's talking to him and then like you just see him and he just stops talking because he's just staring at him. You know what I mean? It's almost like like a snake in the bushes or something like that, where it's just like it's staring at you getting ready for the attack. I find that more disturbing than, what Tim Curry did. I mean, let's be honest here. I think Tim Curry's best asset in that movie is his voice. You know what I mean? He's got that very Tim Curry voice. And without that, I don't think his performance would have been anything. But again, though, his voice is part of him.
It's Tim Curry doing a voice that's not his. He's doing that Jersey Shore kind of thing, kind of voice, which is so, if you see him and hear him in other things, you're like, that came out of that guy's mouth. And it's not what you expect to come out of the thing's mouth. The difference here is that Pennywise, talks like I would expect that clown to sound. Like it matches it, even though it is off-putting and weird. I mean, that's the thing about this movie, is that it instead of being, I don't know, terrifying, I think it thrives on being just really weird and just making you feel really icky all the time. I mean, the subtext and, again, the language of some of the kids and some of this other stuff just makes you feel like, like, let's talk about Eddie's home life. Like, instead of, again, being from, the well-to-do family, thank you, and and being a hypochondriac because of that. His mom is like this lazy white trash, fat woman who's sitting around eating bonbons all day, and she over medicates her kid because she's obsessed.
Jay, I've seen this. I've seen this, and I know my dad listens to this podcast, so he probably won't be too mad about this. But one of my aunts, this was her. Wow. Just heavily overweight and just, she had one son just like Eddie. And this was kind of what it was, where it was just overbearing. This is my, almost my property, everything. But this is the only, because I'm so fat. I mean, again, I'm not trying to be an asshole here, but because she's so physically unattractive, that's the only person she has. You know what I mean? She has no hope of being able to find a mate. So she puts all that love and attention, fear, and everything on that kid, and that's what she's scared about. Is she's scared about losing that for herself.
I, you said a word there that I think says it all: property. She treats him like that's her property,
Oh
right?
yeah, totally. I could totally
Yeah.
just give you a background on probably what else. She was probably married and she had Eddie, and she ended up gaining a lot of weight. The husband probably left her, and she's terrified of losing Eddie now. It's like, that's all I have left. I can't lose him. And that's exactly how she comes off. But I do love the little touch though too. She's driving a Gremlin. That's awesome.
Yeah, that woman would drive that car. I don't know. Again, I feel like he kind of gets shoved to the side. He gets a couple of good lines. The kid does, and he looks like Fred Savage. So I kind of get a kick out of that. But
he totally looks like a kid though from the '80s with that haircut. You know what I mean?
Completely. Look, hey man, I grew up in the '80s. In the '90s, I had that haircut. Okay,
you still do. So
I mean, I wish I had that much hair still, man. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little jealous. I wish I had that much hair still, but I don't. So anyway, but yeah, I don't know. Again, they make choices with these kids to change them up, and that's why I say I wonder if this would work, and I kind of think it would work if you just took these kids, because the thing that's different from this about, I've talked how much about Stranger Things, influences. The thing that's different is that there's two adults in Stranger Things that anchor that series major. All right, and that's missing greatly from this series or from this movie in particular. Like, you don't have David Harbour and Winona Ryder there. I think they anchor Stranger Things as much as anything. It's probably the best stuff Winona Ryder's ever done. I mean, to be honest, and she's done a lot of work, but it's a fantastic performance, and Harbour's great in it too. There's no adults to anchor any of this. And because they're not going to do that, and there weren't really any in the book either, I get that. That's why I'm saying I don't know that this movie needed to carry the weight of this book and all the baggage that comes with it. Could they have fashioned a story about an evil that cycles around and does some of the same stuff and not called it? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, they called it Jeepers Creepers or Jeepers Creepers, but
oh gosh, wow, what a pull, by the way. Talk about something that's icky and hard to discuss because of the people involved in making it. But anyway,
but that's one thing too, is like, what I think people need to remember about this movie is you want to be with the kids the entire time, because this is their world, and Pennywise is only going after children. He's not going after adults. And to bring in like that adult sense of responsibility is, you're going to be watching the movie and kind of hoping that the adult like kind of intervenes or saves the days or pulls the kids out of the sewer, almost like Stranger Things, where he's, spoiler alert, where he goes and rescues Will. You know what I mean? But when it's just the kids, you're feeling the fear because they don't have anybody else there to save them. And then even on the flip side, you're seeing the adults, the pharmacist guy and everything like that, where it's like, yeah, the adults are pretty kind of screwed up here. So it makes you even fear for these kids even more, because not only do they have a vicious clown coming at them, they don't really have any type of solid foundation, parental or adult foundation here to help them out. And that's one thing too, is like, I guess, they could have made Pennywise even more scary or something like that. But again, this is all in the mind of a child. These, they're 13, 12, they're still children.
uh-huh.
So it's kind of like, what they're trying to do here is just kind of showing you their world.
But the thing is, though, like, yes, they are children. I agree with that statement. But they want them to be so much more adult than they really are. Well,
they're in that awkward age, though. It's like, I remember like my mom always used to say when I was that age, it's like, you're too young for girls, but too old for toys. You know what I mean? It's just that awkward age.
I guess so. I don't know. I guess I just never, there was something that I was disconnecting from because of the way this story is structured. And maybe it is the fact that I just keep bumping up against what they've done to some of the characters that, frankly, I liked, and I wanted them to have a little bit more of a part in it. And I'm just not liking the changes that they've made here. I mean, again, like, this more or less works. I mean, it's fine and it kind of works, but I don't know that it was necessary to be honest. Like, again, there's nothing about this that just screams like, oh yes, Stephen King's It. Like it just doesn't feel like it.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do, though, with the story and the other miniseries doing the recycling back and forth between the adults and the kids. So this is really, really a different take on the material here. But to me, I think that, just the feelings that I got, throughout the movie and just kind of the creepiness and everything like this on it, it felt more true to the book's kind of atmosphere than the miniseries ever was.
Really? In what way? Like specifically, tell me, because I'm not seeing that.
There's a sense of dread throughout this entire movie, and the book had that too. Especially the book had some great stuff in there that's never going to be in these movies. Is they kind of did like these kind of every time you get like through a quarter of the book, they would take you back through the history of Derry, and you would be able to kind of whether it was someone telling a story or just a retelling of stuff that used to happen, and those I found were the most effective parts of the book because they set this kind of a dread where it was just like, oh crap, this thing is unstoppable. Every time it comes here, it just destroys and it kills. It's brings on violence between people, and I think this movie really relayed that well. It just felt like the town was sick. It just really felt like that throughout the entire movie.
But see, I got that too, because they even talk about it, and they really talk about it in the second part of that miniseries. But they talk about the fact that, like, everybody turns a blind eye to the weird shit that happens in that town because they're infected by whatever it is.
See, in the miniseries, it felt like they just couldn't see him, where in this one, it felt like he was poisoning them.
So you felt like it was more active, that like he was actually making them evil versus other
I think
areas.
Not necessarily that he was making them evil, but just more of like, he's like carbon monoxide in the air and everybody's sick off of it, where his influence, his presence there is just making everybody just a bad person. Everything's just bad. That's the reason why the cop's such an asshole. That's the reason why the librarian's such a shrew. That's the reason why
the cop's not really a bad guy. That's the thing. Like, we shouldn't.
He's an asshole. I mean,
his son is a jerk, and he calls him out on it. That doesn't make him an asshole. That makes him a tough parent.
But why do you think his kid's a jerk though?
Well, his kid's a jerk because his kid's a little punk, and somebody needs to kick his ass, and so his dad does it for him. That's that.
I'm gonna totally go Freudian on you, man. You know what? Maybe he acts like that because he used to get his ass kicked by his dad, and that's how he sits there now and does that. Is like, hey, my dad's a tough guy and he beats the shit out of me, and I'm gonna be a tough guy and beat the shit out of everybody else. But he's always got that. It's always that level of dominance over someone where he eventually wants to be dominant over his dad, which he does at the end. But that's the reason why he's such a creep, is because his dad is just as much of a creep as he is. It's just spreading the poison down the line.
Okay, that's a nice psychoanalyzing of Henry Bowers, but I just took it as look, I knew kids that were the kids of tough
Dude, if
parents.
that was my kid, I wouldn't grab a gun and shoot him by the feet in front of his friends. I'd pull him inside, say, you know what, guys, you go home, and I would freaking, I'm not going to beat the shit out of him. I'm not that type of dad, but it's just like, I'd have a talk with him, and it's like, you know what? He ain't, you know what I mean? There'd be discipline with it.
I'm not saying Henry Bowers' father was Father of the Year. Okay,
he's sitting back there though when the kids are he's picking on those kids, and he's sitting back there with his arms crossed, and you can just tell he's just measuring his own dick, because he's just like, yeah, because I'm the big cheese around here, and it's like that's exactly what his kid would have became the next sheriff, if you know what I mean, if he didn't fall that well.
And let's talk about what happens to Henry Bowers in this. And because that's a big thing, is that in the book, his friends get tapped out by it, and when they're down in the sewers, because he's basically been coerced to go down there and kill for it. But now he's wiped out everybody he knows. He gets down there, and Mike basically tricks him into falling down a well, and it breaks him in half. And I'm like, well, I guess that's the end of him. What that was. I was a little abrupt. I wasn't ready for Henry to just, be out of the story. And my question, I was like, well, are they going to bring him back and he's going to be mangled but still threaten the next one? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that was just, I don't think they knew that they were going to get a sequel out of it, so they wanted to close that thread on him. So I mean,
Well,
in
yeah,
all
but now they
seriousness,
created a problem because he is still a problem for them as adults later on. He's one of the tools of it. So now they've created a hole that they're like, well, now we're gonna have to create a new villain, for to chase the kids around as adults.
it's a simple fix. He's a paraplegic. He's comatose. He's in a wheelchair. And when Pennywise comes and talks to him and like, hey, I need you again, or whatever, kind of sounded like Vince McMahon there.
Yeah, that did sound like Vince, by the way.
Yeah. All suddenly Henry Bowers is going to, all suddenly he's going to be able to walk. You know what I mean? That's what they're going to do in the next one.
Okay, that's an interesting way to look at it. I hadn't thought about doing it that way, but I guess that would work. So anyway, the point being is that
they got to pin the kids all the kids' deaths on somebody, and that's what Henry Bowers was. He was the fall guy.
He was the scapegoat. Yeah, that's the other thing too. Is I'm like, I don't know if they ever really explained it before, but they don't explain it at all. In this, like, the end of this is them doing the blood oath by the river, and then we're all off to Never Never Land. Like, we get a line that Bev's going to live with her aunt in somewhere else and not there, so she's going to be gone. Her and Bill have this big kiss, and that's it. And then everybody kind of goes their separate ways. And I kind of took it as this is the point when they all stop being friends with each other now, right? I mean, and I thought, well, that's weird because the way we were led to believe was that they remained friends until they all grew up and graduated high school. But I sort of felt like this, like next year when they go back to school, like these kids aren't going to be friends anymore. They've had this traumatic thing and they're just done now.
Yeah, and I think that's, it's kind of like almost Stand By Me-ish, where it's kind of like, after that summer, we all kind of went our separate ways and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I know, I keep on seeing like this saying on Facebook where people are always like, the last time you hung out with your friends, you never knew it was going to be the last time you hung out with your friends or some crap like that. So I think it's kind of like, it's going on that where, what they are, this was Pennywise brought them together. You know what I mean?
But he also tore them apart because this is the end of their time together, we're led to believe.
Well, his demise, basically.
That's what I want to ask you. What do they do to him exactly? Because I know they beat the crap out of him several times. I mean, Bev stabs him with a piece of wrought iron, and he gets beat with some baseball bats, and a lot of other.
It's always been a problem. It's always been a problem with this of the material itself. I mean, you even go back to the miniseries. Eddie uses a inhaler on him and his face starts melting.
But wait a minute. But I know that looks cheesy or whatever. But the thought of that makes sense. Is that if you can manifest our fears on us, then we can manifest stuff that is just here for us to be whatever we want it to be. So we take these ordinary objects and we turn them into super weapons because screw you. If we're going to be in a world where we can just say it and it is. It's kind of like the end of Nightmare on Elm Street. I can just wish you to not be there anymore, and then it is. And I actually like that. That's a decent conceit. The second part is the part that sucks because that spider looks terrible, and it's because they didn't know what to do. They didn't have any money. That's that movie's problem. This one, it's like they beat the crap out of him, and then like Bill like razzes him as he slinks down a hole. Like, screw you, you're going to go to bed hungry. I'm like, would you send him to bed without dinner? What the hell was that?
Well, but in the miniseries, though, they never even explain that, though. You know what I mean? That, like, we can manifest this thing or whatever. It's just all suddenly
they decide because, again, based on their 50 sensibilities, like, let's get silver. Silver will kill it because it kills all the, the werewolves and the vampires or whatever. And so them believing it makes it so. So they hurl that they slingshot that stuff at him, hit him in the head, and then he bursts into light, and it's a bad effect. But the idea is right. The idea is that we do something together, we bond together, we believe, and then we put him down. This time, like, all that happens is, again, they beat the crap out of him with a bunch of blunt instruments, and then Bill talks shit to him.
Well, it's a prison shitting, you know what I mean? They got all these guys going around him, and they're just gonna completely beat the crap out of him. But really, I mean, it's. But it's explained in here, though, too, is like he only gets his powers. It's just like Freddy, you know what I mean? Where he gets his powers when people believe in him. You know what I mean? It's like Santa Claus. You know what I mean? You got to believe in him for him to exist. Well, I'm thinking like Elf. You know what I mean? The only reason his sled flies is when people are sitting there and they believe in him and stuff like that. What we see here, though, is Pennywise and his power and everything like that is, I guess, kind of like Freddy, where it's it's only there when people fear him. And when people start fearing him less, or they don't fear him at all, as what these kids come to do, he loses all his powers. So that's what they end up doing, is once he becomes weakened, it's just beat the hell out of him. You know what I mean? Just, you're beating the hell out of him, even showing even more that you're not scared of him. But I think even like a bigger thing here is when he's holding Bill hostage, he's got him aside and he's like, listen, we're going to negotiate here, and you guys leave me alone. I take Bill, and we'll call it square. He doesn't say it like that, but right there showing if he had power at all, he wouldn't even negotiate. You know what I mean? He would just have gone and just picked off the kids one by one. And I like it better. I like it better than them just imagining these things work. I mean, hell, if these kids were smarter in the book, hey, let's grab a Nerf gun and all of a sudden it's a bazooka. You know what I mean? And it'll blow them apart. But here it's like, they actually have to conquer their own fear. And by conquering what's inside of them, weakens him down to nothing.
I see what you're saying or whatever, but I'll tell you now, I don't like it as much as I like that original conceit and idea that they figure out this is all a mind trick, so we're going to turn the mind trick on this son of a bitch. And that's exactly what they do. Here, they do just prison ship him. They just beat the shit out of him in the yard. I don't know. It just seemed like, I don't know, it seemed a little overly unnecessary, but he just kind of weasel away. The problem is, though, there's no good way to deal, and this is, you hit it. The problem is the source material doesn't give you a good way to vex this thing. There's never been a good answer because Stephen King cannot stick the damn landing from the triple, Lutz jump or whatever that he tries every time. And there's no good way to end this. It's all this grand buildup, and there's no good way to stop it.
Well, and it's like a lot of movies. I mean, God, you never thought I'd bring up this, but like you look at like something like Independence Day, where it's like, we're going to create this ultimate threat. And then it's like, well, crap, we got to find a way for them to beat it. And that's the problem here, is where you got this being, this macroverse being that's from another dimension and this and that. And it's like, really, I mean, how are a bunch of kids going to beat this thing? You know what I mean? In all reality, this thing should be able to just transform into a big giant Paul Bunyan statue and take an axe and cut him in half. You know what I mean?
Right.
Kind of, little thing that happens in the book. But, yeah, it's just it's one of the problems when you create such a fantastical villain that it's sometimes very hard to make their demise or their downfall believable.
Yeah, and I mean that's this problem is with the source material, and it's the problem this movie has too, is it doesn't, where do you end it? How do you? I mean, you obviously end it with them confronting the thing in the sewers, and then after that they go their separate ways, but I don't know. I just feel like, well, I don't know what's a better answer. I just didn't think that was all that interesting, honestly. Like I thought they could have done it better. I mean, that's just what I'm saying.
Well, they could have went even further in the book and shown that there was a giant turtle and that this turtle was guiding them.
No, see, that's the other thing. They didn't need to do that either. Yeah, that's the other part of this where, again, I think Stephen King is tripping balls. And it's just got into some really weird alternate reality stuff like that kind of stuff. I'm like, no, you need to leave that out of the movie. That's fine as a book conceit because it becomes interesting, that whole Ritual to Chud thing or whatever. And I am glad they didn't try to do that, because if you read that in the book and you try to imagine what that would even look like on a
child orgy,
it's well, yeah, they went away from that thankfully too, and wisely, because again, those things didn't need to happen to advance the story. Stephen King goes overboard, and we talked about that last time, and I didn't want that in this, but I don't know. I felt like we got to the end here, and then it was just like, and we're done.
Well, but the same thing goes with Freddy though too. I mean, I know you're a big fan of those movies. How many times have they beat Freddy like that?
Oh no, look,
where it was like,
I'll tell you now,
they just beat the hell out of him.
The way that
sometimes.
first one ends is stupid. Okay, like yeah, I hate the ending of that first movie, even though I gave that movie pretty much a pass and said it was definitely worth watching. The ending of that is dumb. All right, it's so dumb, and there's no other way to say it. It's just dumb, but the rest of it is worth it. This for me though is I kept getting pulled out of it because I kept having this discussion in my own head of like, did this need to be it? This movie feels like it's burdened with, we have to hit all these Stephen King things that we want to do, but we're much more interested in just creating this new thing. And the other thing, and I'm going to say this now too, the other group in the miniseries, those kids looked like they got along. There was like a bond between them. And from everything I've read, all these kids really loved doing this and had a great time, and good for them. It didn't come across on the screen. Like, I didn't get the friendships that the bonds of friendship that I saw in that TV 90-minute, miniseries thing before. I felt like a couple of these people maybe got on with each other, and then the rest of them were just kind of there. Like, and that's a fault of the movie for spending so much time on establishing them as kids and doing all the nostalgia callbacks and stuff, but never selling me that there was actual relationships between them. That's why I said at the end, and you're right to call out Stand By Me, it definitely feels that way, but I don't feel like that's earned at all, that they all walk away from each other, because I didn't feel like they were that closely bonded to begin with.
Well, I think the three of them were. I think, Eddie, Richie, and Bill were. They came off to me as like, and Stanley. We really didn't bring him up much.
Stanley just kind of, as he does in the other book, and also in the
he's
book,
such a drip.
He's
such
hates,
a drip.
He doesn't get the best line at the end, like, I hate all of you. Because all they do is make his life hell. So I understand. I'm with you, Stan. So get better friends.
Yeah, but that's the whole thing is like I believe that those four were friends and stuff like that, and I think that's kind of the point though, because like Mike and Ben are kind of outsiders, and so is Bev. You know what I mean? They did come into this group and stuff late, but to me I felt the four of those boys. To me it felt like they were friends.
Okay, because I maybe in moments, but I don't know. There's parts of it that it just didn't work. But I think we've talked around it enough. It's time to get into final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. So what are yours for, as it's now known, It Chapter 1, Nick?
I like this movie. I like this movie a lot. It was one that I saw in theaters. I thought it was a really fun theater experience, minus a couple assholes in front of me during the theater that were easily startled, and one of them fell out of his chair. Just annoying as all hell, especially when I'm sitting there next to my 10-year-old, and he's just like looking, he's like, I wasn't scared.
Yeah, but your 10-year-old grew up watching Alien, so come on. There's no way Chase is not desensitized to all this violence now.
Oh, it was funny though. It was like he had to go to the bathroom, and he's still 10, so I walk him to the restroom and stuff like that and wait for him outside. But like I'm waiting for him outside, and like one of the ladies there is just like, hey, how's he doing? And I'm like, he's fine. She goes, he had a big smile on his face when he was walking out. I'm like, yeah, I said he likes horror movies, but yeah. But to me though, kind of like Stranger Things is, the horror aspect there is secondary to me. It's all about just kind of watching the kids talk to each other, rip on each other. I just find that stuff to be kind of the, stuff I like, you know what I mean? I kind of like watching the relationships between them all and everything like that. The Pennywise stuff is good. I like the special effects in here. I think there are some really, really, effective, creepy scenes. The only down part is I think it relies on jump scares just a little bit too much. And when they do the jump scares, they do the jump scares and they turn up the volume to 11. So no matter what, you're going to be startled. But, yeah, to me, it's a large popcorn. I'm really interested to see what they do in Chapter 2. I really hope they bring these kids back for Chapter 2. I know that it's going to be more of an adult one, but I think they could kind of do the flashback and flash forwards and, at least give these kids a good, 20, 30 minutes of the next movie.
I know that they are going to do flashbacks with them. They've talked about that already in the next one. I'll be real curious to see how they cast the adult analogs to these kids. I know who I have in my head, and I won't say any of it now, but I'm curious to see what they decide to do. Ultimately, this movie, if I'm being completely honest about it, I just keep going back to the fact that I think they made some interesting choices, and then they made some that were just unnecessary. Like it's almost like the Stephen King book in that way, is that they went just a little too far with some of it and then didn't go far enough with other pieces of it. And I never got the camaraderie that I wanted the Losers Club to have. And I guess maybe the fact that they're trying to say is that wouldn't have happened in the 80s. People didn't, do like that or whatever. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. But I miss the I don't want to say wholesomeness, but I guess wholesomeness of the way that those all kind of worked together before. I felt like I don't know, they missed on some of the relationships with the kids, and that was disappointing in some ways because I really thought they had a good cast here, and I think Bill Skarsgård is very, very good as Pennywise, as it. All of that works completely, but again, they don't know how to stick the landing, and it's not the worst thing I saw, from last year. I mean, not even by far. It's pretty good. I mean, it's decent. It's just not. It's not completely satisfying, but it's enough that I want to see part two. Like, I'm hooked enough that I'm like, oh yeah, and I'll go see it in theaters too. Because even though my friend told me, hey, you don't need to see this in a theater, I kind of wish I had, because I think the experience might have been better. I mean, I just watched it alone on my tablet, and I was like, well, that's fine, but it's not that big of a deal. And I watched it on regular television the second time, but it was it's fine, but it could have been so much more. And to me, I label a lot of things medium popcorn when they frustrate me. And this movie ultimately just frustrates me because it could be so much better than it is, but it's just not. It's kind of like, the band Poison. I like that band a lot, okay? I mean, I make no bones about that, but I won't sit here and argue that they're one of the best 80s rock bands of all time, because they're just not. They could have been, but they had no desire to be that great. They'll even tell you, we weren't interested in being great, we just wanted to be famous. And they were. And this movie is like, it could have been great, but it just kind of, cheaped out and did the safe thing, or did the obvious thing, or maybe it went too far at some distances. And that's why it frustrates the crap out of me. So I'm going to give it a medium popcorn, but it's not a bad medium. All right, it's like the good matinee. You got the good batch medium, and I'm intrigued enough that I want to come back to it and hope that maybe the second round they can get it right and it can work better. Because sometimes first chapter doesn't always work. I mean, Brian and I've talked about this recently doing the Path to Redemption show with Angelus. It took that first season like really 18 episodes to figure out what to do and how to do it, and then they took off like a shot. And everybody will tell you, the first season of Buffy is really uneven. There's maybe like 4 or 5 decent episodes out of the 11, if even that many. It was really the second season when that thing took off like a rocket, and it lasted for a couple of years. It's hard to get everything right out of the gate, especially with something that's going, is going to be more than one part. And I know you say, oh, they didn't know they were going to get a hit out of this or whatever. There was an audience for this. There's always been an audience for this. And so I think they knew once they got going with it, this is going to work. We're going to have something with it. But they just didn't completely nail the landing. So I hope they can stick the landing second time. But for this first round, it's going to be medium popcorn for me. So, folks, thanks for joining us on another episode here of Film Strip. We've kind of done the January jumble, I guess you'd say. I mean, we started out with In the Mouth of Madness, and then you and I did that grand Will Smith movie, Bright, and which was, more, could have been renamed Dim. And then we did this now. So this would be kind of fun. We're going to wrap up January. Kurt and I are going to go back to Stanley Kubrick for 2001: A Space Odyssey. And now, Nick, you're not on that show, but I'm going to give you a minute here to just give your brief thoughts on 2001, if you will, because I know you have some.
I've never seen it, so that's my review.
That's what I wanted you to say, is you had never seen it. I hope I can change that for you in the next year, so to get you to devote a couple hours to that at least. But
I just remember 2001 is like, I remember it's like HAL 9000 or something like that. I just remember the skit on The Simpsons where it was Pierce Brosnan that was doing it. That's the only really thing I know about it. And apparently that's actually only like a chunk of the movie. I guess there's like 3 parts to it or whatever. There's like apes and all this other junk going on there. So I don't know.
There's a lot going on in that movie.
It seems like that movie's probably kind of best kept for if I'm really sick on a Saturday and I'm taking a lot of codeine, where I can just kind of sit there and just kind of phase out with it or something. I don't know.
There's one scene in particular where that would aid you, but otherwise I think you need to be kind of coherent to get all of it. But Kurt and I'll talk about that next time. I knew you hadn't seen it, so I wanted you to out yourself here, and thank you for doing so. But God, that's okay. There's things that I haven't seen that, people are like, oh, how can you not have seen that? I'm like, up until this December, I had never seen It's a Wonderful Life. I'll put myself out there. And now I have, and I'll never watch it again. I'll go ahead and tell you. I mean,
I've seen Congo 12 times, but I've never seen 2001 once.
and we've reviewed one of those, and we'll do the next one later. But anyway, and then, okay, I'm really excited about this. February, we're going to do something kind of bold. Ron has been after me to do this for years, and so we've decided to package this a little differently. We're going to do blaxploitation movies, some of like the seminal ones from February. In February, we're going to do Dolomite, Black Dynamite, which is more of a modern one. It's kind of a riff on it. We're going to do the original Shaft, the Richard Roundtree. Then we're going to throw in Black Panther just for the heck of it, because why not? You know, it's a large African American cast. It's a big Marvel movie, and both of us have seen the trailers and are like, you know what? It actually looks pretty good. Let's go give it a shot. So those are going to be our February films. And then after that, we hadn't really planned that far ahead. There's all kinds of stuff in the works behind the scenes. Who knows what we'll come up with? I know you're wanting to do some gangster movies, Nick. We talked about doing some of those through the years, and I've been after you to try to do some Bond films. We won't do the whole 27 of them or how many ever there are, but we talked about a way to do that. So who knows what's going to come up here on Film Strip. And we're also we're planning some more crossovers. We did a couple last year with the guys from the Generation Y. We started this year with the folks from Based on a True Crime, and so we may have some more crossover episodes coming up along the way as well. And you know, Kurt will be back with some Fabish Factor stuff throughout 2018 as well. So again, thanks for listening to the show, folks. If you like the show, leave us a positive review on iTunes. It's my goal to try to get us to like 50 written reviews on iTunes. This show's been around for nearly 9 years, and we're still like in the 20s. Please just write a couple lines. Show's really fun, you know, or something like that. And if you don't like the show, don't review us. But if you love it, please give us a positive review on iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher or wherever you listen to it. And of course, you can always find our episodes on those, so subscribe. Or if you want to, you can go to our website, continuousplaypodcast.com. You'll find all of our podcast ventures, the Path to Redemption Angel show and the Art of Slaying Buffy shows that I mentioned before, all the past Film Strip shows. I mean, if things go right, Nick, we're going to pass 300 reviews this year for this series. Isn't that crazy? So, yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah, it's hard to think about it. But, yeah, you go back. We've got a big back catalog. So we dropped some of it here. I mean, we've done all the Nightmare on Elm Street, Hellraisers. Oh, yeah, I hear there's a new Hellraiser film coming out, Nick. I think we might have to revisit.
I saw there's a new Hellraiser one, too, because the trailer was just recently released. So, yeah, so, saw that.
It looks like it got maybe double the budget the last one did, so there's hope. So,
yeah, it looks like it's ready for a Lifetime. So.
Hey, man, Lifetime movies have upgraded a lot. Did you see that 2 Corey's one recently? That's another thing, too. We might do some more Lifetime here, folks. You never know. So, again, we appreciate your support. Thanks for listening to the show. And for next time, for Nick, I'm Jay. This has been Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, continuousplaypodcast.com/movies. Please leave us a positive review on iTunes and link up with us on Facebook. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121.